15 one-hit wonders from 1968 that shocked the world, then disappeared. 1968 wasn't just protests, psychedelic posters, and headlines about war. It was the year some of the strangest, boldest, and most unlikely songs in history shot straight to #1. And then their creators vanished almost overnight. Parody that teased the Beatles. A singer who literally set his own head on fire. A 17-minute rock epic born from a slurred lyric. And an instrumental B-side that erased its own frontman. These weren't just hits. They were lightning strikes. And behind every one of them was chaos, pressure, and stories far wilder than the music itself. Let's go back to the year it all exploded. Parody, pop manipulation, and psychedelic identity crises. Started with a joke. When John Fred and his Playboy band released Judy in Disguise with Glasses, most listeners assumed it was just another playful psychedelic single. But beneath the surface, it was a bold wink at the biggest band on the planet. The title itself was a cheeky twist on the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. In an era when the Beatles ruled the airwaves like royalty, parodying them felt almost dangerous. John Fred wasn't a London rocker. He was from Louisiana. And yet somehow, his playful misinterpretation soared to #1 in January 1968, knocking even British giants off their pedestal. Rumor has long suggested Fred worried the Fab Four might take offense. Some accounts claim he even tried reaching out to smooth things over. Whether that actually happened remains foggy. But here's the irony. The Beatles reportedly found it amusing. If anything, the parody showed just how deeply psychedelic culture had penetrated America. But success came with a shadow. Fred's identity became locked to that one novelty hit. Critics dismissed him as a gimmick. Radio loved the song, but didn't know what to do with him after. And just like that, the lightning faded. But if that was playful experimentation, the next hit tells a darker story. One about record labels shaping bands against their will. Enter the Lemon Pipers. When Green Tambourine hit #1, it sounded like a shimmering psychedelic dream. Guitar textures, swirling production, candy-colored optimism. It felt like the summer of love bottled into 3 minutes. But behind the scenes, resentment. The Lemon Pipers were a serious rock band from Ohio. They wanted to lean into heavier blues-driven sounds. Their label Buda Records had other plans. Bubblegum pop was exploding, and executives smelled money. Green Tambourine was the result. The band complied. Became a massive hit. But internal tension simmered. Members later expressed frustration at being packaged as a bubblegum act instead of credible musicians. One version of the story claims at least one member threatened to quit if forced to repeat the formula. That's the trap of 1968. The industry moved fast. If you had a hit, labels wanted clones. If you resisted, you disappeared. The Lemon Pipers couldn't replicate the magic under those constraints. And just like that, their kaleidoscopic moment passed. But 1968 wasn't finished playing with fire. Because the next artist didn't just flirt with danger. He wore it on his head. Shock rock before shock rock existed. Before Alice Cooper. Before Kiss. Before stage blood and theatrical horror. There was Arthur Brown. When fire erupted onto the charts, it didn't just sound different. Felt dangerous. I am the god of hellfire. That opening line alone was enough to unsettle parents across America. Some radio stations reportedly hesitated, worried it sounded too demonic for mainstream audiences. And then there were the live shows. Arthur Brown performed wearing a flaming helmet. Actual flames. More than once, fire marshals grew nervous. On certain nights, the fire reportedly got too close for comfort backstage. Small incidents sparked chaos. But controversy only fueled curiosity. And curiosity fueled sales. Fire became an international hit in 1968, reaching #2 in the US and #1 in the UK. Brown had created theatrical rock years before the genre had a name. But here's the cruel twist. The spectacle overshadowed the substance. Arthur Brown's dramatic persona became larger than his catalog. When follow-up material didn't match the shock value, the mainstream audience moved on. Lightning struck, then vanished. But if Arthur Brown flirted with danger in 3 minutes, Iron Butterfly stretched it to 17. Inagata Devita was excess incarnate. The title itself reportedly came from a slurred version of In the Garden of Eden, mumbled during rehearsal. The story goes that frontman Doug Ingle was under the influence, though whether it was alcohol, exhaustion, or something stronger remains debated. What wasn't debated? Length. 17 minutes of swirling organ, hypnotic riffs, and one of the most iconic drum solos in rock history. Radio stations initially panicked. 17 minutes doesn't fit programming blocks, so they edited it down, carefully, strategically. But something about the track tapped directly into the psychedelic mindset of 1968. The album sold millions. It became one of the best-selling records of the era. Critics called it repetitive. Others called it groundbreaking. And yet, despite spawning a movement in heavy and psychedelic rock, Iron Butterfly never replicated that magnitude of success again. A 17-minute epic became their defining and limiting achievement. Because sometimes the bigger the explosion, the harder it is to follow. And what happened next might be the strangest twist of all. Because in 1968, one of the biggest hits in America wasn't even supposed to be the hit. It was hiding on the B-side. Continuing next with Section 3. Accidental hits and career irony. Proceed. Perfect. Continuing seamlessly. Accidental hits, industry irony, and being erased by your own song. In 1968, you didn't just compete with other artists. You competed with your own B-side. That's exactly what happened to Cliff Nobles and Company. The A-side of their single featured Cliff Nobles singing lead. It was the track the label believed in. The song they pushed. The one meant to introduce him as the star. But radio DJs did something unexpected. They flipped the record. On the B-side sat an instrumental version of that same recording, driven by a punchy horn line and infectious rhythm. No vocals, no frontman, just groove. That instrumental was called The Horse, and it took off. DJs across the country began playing the B-side instead. Listeners loved it. The horns felt bold, confident, almost cinematic. Without meaning to, the industry had stumbled into something purer. The Horse galloped all the way to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. Here's the brutal irony. Cliff Nobles doesn't sing on his own biggest hit. Imagine watching your career-defining moment unfold without you in it. There's no record of a public meltdown. No explosive interviews. But insiders have long hinted that the situation left Nobles baffled. After all, the industry had just told him, without saying it directly, that the music worked better without his voice. That's 1968 in a nutshell. Fame didn't just come fast. Came sideways. But Cliff Nobles wasn't the only artist blindsided by the mechanics of the music machine. Take Mason Williams. Before Classical Gas became one of the most recognizable instrumental hits of the era, Williams wasn't primarily known as a musician. He was a comedy writer for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Behind-the-scenes creative. Not a rock star. Then he picked up a classical guitar. Classical Gas blended orchestral arrangements with modern rhythm. It felt sophisticated but accessible. High art and pop culture colliding in the same 3 minutes. It won Grammys. It dominated airwaves. It proved that instrumental music could compete with vocal hits in the psychedelic era. But even here, industry skepticism lingered. Some executives reportedly questioned whether Williams could be taken seriously as a musician because of his comedic background. Was he a novelty? A one-off? The song's massive success answered that question. Temporarily. Yet despite continued work and respect within musical circles, Williams never again captured that same mainstream lightning. And then there's the global story hidden inside a feel-good melody. Hugh Masekela, when Grazing in the Grass soared to number 1 in 1968, it sounded joyful, effervescent, bright horns dancing over a playful groove. But Masekela's life was anything but lightweight. born in South Africa. He was living in exile due to apartheid. His music carried the weight of displacement and activism. He had already been involved in politically conscious art long before this instrumental crossover hit. There's a persistent rumor that Masekela initially thought the track was too simple, too commercial, to represent his deeper artistic identity. But he recorded it anyway, and it bridged worlds. Grazing in the Grass didn't just top charts. It introduced American audiences to African jazz influences in a way that felt effortless. Yet here's the twist again. Mainstream America embraced the cheerful instrumental. But many listeners had no idea about the political fire behind the man playing those horns. The industry loves simplicity. It doesn't always know what to do with complexity. 3 different artists, 3 very different stories. One common thread. 1968 didn't just create hits. It created moments that defined careers, sometimes by accident. But while instrumentals were sneaking onto the charts, something else was stirring in the culture. The sexual revolution. And not everyone was comfortable with what came next. Taboo, radio panic, and the sound of a changing America. If there's one thing 1968 did well, it was push boundaries. And sometimes those boundaries pushed back. When Merrily Rush released Angel of the Morning, the melody felt tender, vulnerable, almost innocent. But listen closely to the lyrics. This wasn't a fairy tale romance. It hinted at a woman choosing to be with someone for one night, fully aware of the consequences. No promises, no future, just emotional intensity. In more conservative parts of America, that was risky territory. Some radio stations reportedly debated whether the song's mature themes were appropriate for daytime rotation. It wasn't explicit, but it was bold. And boldness often fuels curiosity. Instead of hurting the track, the controversy gave it momentum. Rush's voice carried heartbreak and strength in equal measure. The ambiguity made it powerful. The song became a hit. And over time, it was covered again and again by artists across genres. Sometimes taboo doesn't destroy a song. It immortalizes it. But while Angel of the Morning explored emotional risk, another 1968 hit stirred controversy in a very different way. The Occasions released Girl Watcher. On the surface it was breezy, playful, a catchy summer groove about admiring women walking by. But cultural shifts were already underway. Some critics labeled it objectifying, dismissive, reducing women to spectacle. The band insisted it was harmless fun. And many listeners agreed. The song climbed into the top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Still, in certain markets, hesitation lingered. 1968 was a crossroads year. Free love was celebrated in some cities, questioned in others. Girl Watcher became part of that tension. And then came a quieter controversy wrapped in country sweetness. Gene and Debbie's Playboy. The duet told a familiar story. A woman cautioning her partner about wandering eyes. But rumor has always followed this track. Some fans speculated the Playboy figure in the lyrics was inspired by a real-life Nashville personality. Next, Flirt, a known charmer. The duo never confirmed it, which only made people more curious. The song found success, but the pair couldn't duplicate the magic. Because in 1968, lightning rarely struck twice. Behind these catchy hooks were artists navigating social transformation in real time. The rules were changing. Gender roles were shifting. Radio executives were nervous. And still, the hits kept coming. But the next story might be the strangest emotional roller coaster of them all. Cake in the Rain. And a ballad so dramatic some called it genius. And others called it absurd. Either way, no one forgot it. Continuing next with Section 5. Melodrama, soul and songs that almost broke the charts. Proceed. Continuing seamlessly. Meltdown ballads, soul power and songs that divided the world. By the summer of 1968, the charts were already unpredictable. But then came a song about cake. Richard Harris's MacArthur Park. If you had turned on the radio that year and heard an actor, not a rock star, not a pop idol, belting out an 8-minute orchestral epic about a cake melting in the rain. You might have thought the DJ was joking, but they weren't. MacArthur Park was written by the young, intensely emotional songwriter Jimmy Webb. The story goes that Webb poured the pain of a breakup into the lyrics. The cake, metaphor, the rain, lost time, regret, love dissolving before it could be saved. At least, that's one interpretation. Others have long speculated Webb may have been in a deeply altered state of mind when he wrote it. Whether that meant heartbreak or something stronger has always remained unclear. But what's undeniable is how surreal the lyrics felt compared to everything else on the charts. And then came Richard Harris, an Irish actor best known for dramatic film roles. Not exactly the typical pop frontman. Yet his theatrical voice gave the song grandeur, almost operatic weight. Radio programmers hesitated. 8 minutes was long. The arrangement was dramatic. The imagery baffled people. But the public leaned in. MacArthur Park climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. And it divided listeners instantly. Some called it genius, ahead of its time, emotionally raw. Others called it absurd, overwritten, unintentionally funny. Either way, nobody ignored it. That's the thing about 1968. Subtlety wasn't the goal. Intensity was. But while Richard Harris delivered melodrama on a grand orchestral scale, another artist brought quiet soul into the spotlight. Barbara Acklin. Her song Love Makes a Woman didn't rely on spectacle. No flaming helmets. No psychedelic haze. Just smooth, confident vocals wrapped in warm orchestration. In a year dominated by male rock bands, Acklin carved out space with emotional clarity. The track crossed over from R&B into the pop top 20, proving that heartfelt soul could compete in a turbulent era. But the industry wasn't always fair. Acklin was signed to Brunswick Records, the same label home to heavy hitters like Jackie Wilson. Insiders have long suggested promotional budgets often favored bigger male stars. Airplay decisions reflected those priorities. That meant Acklin had to fight harder for visibility. Still, the song endured. Love Makes a Woman became one of those quiet triumphs of 1968, a reminder that beneath the noise there was depth. And yet, even with talent, emotion, and chart success, sustaining momentum in 1968 was brutally difficult. Because the audience's attention moved fast. And if you didn't evolve quickly enough, you were yesterday's headline. But 1968 wasn't just about heartbreak or spectacle. It was also about hope, unity, and bands that believed music could change everything. The next chapter might be the most bittersweet of them all. Peace, unity, and the collapse behind the curtain. I think it's so groovy now. That opening line from Friend and Lovers, Reach Out of the Darkness, sounded like pure optimism. Acoustic strumming, gentle harmonies, a celebration of togetherness. Released during the cultural upheaval of 1968, the song distilled the hippie ethos into 3 minutes of sunshine. People are finally getting together. Climbed into the top 10. But behind that message of unity stood a husband and wife duo navigating the realities of marriage under sudden fame. Jim and Kathy Post weren't just bandmates. They were partners in life. And when a single explodes, the pressure doesn't just affect the stage. It affects the home. While no explosive scandal ever dominated headlines, whispers of creative disagreements followed. Different ideas about musical direction. Different ambitions. The subtle tension of balancing personal and professional identities. The duo never replicated that chart moment. The song remains a time capsule of 1968 optimism, frozen in amber. But optimism doesn't always hold bands together. Take the Human Bains. Their explosive garage anthem, Nobody But Me, hammered the word no dozens of times with raw, aggressive energy. Felt rebellious, direct, almost chaotic. Became a hit. But then came the identity crisis. Some accounts suggest the band wanted to experiment with heavier sounds. Their label, however, preferred accessible, radio-friendly tracks that could mimic the single's success. The clash stalled momentum. The irony. Decades later, Nobody But Me would resurface in films and television, gaining a second life long after the band had faded. Sometimes a song outlives its creators. And then there's People, the San Jose band who found success with I Love You. Written by Chris White of the Zombies, the song carried sincerity in a year overflowing with psychedelia. Their version reached number 14 on the Billboard charts. Momentum was building, but internal friction began to simmer. One of the group's key members, Larry Norman, was increasingly drawn toward Christian rock influences, a path that didn't align with everyone else's vision. Other members wanted a heavier, secular direction. Creative divergence turned into division, and just like that, the opportunity slipped away. I Love You remains a haunting reminder of potential. What might have happened if unity had held? That's the recurring theme of 1968. Lightning struck. But
thank you, my viewer. I hope you keep it here on my channel for more discoveries on all the celebrities' untold journeys. Like, comment, and subscribe on Hajararama channel. Thank you so much.